What would you do if you woke up one morning and found something you loved completely destroyed? Not by accident, not by nature, but by someone's deliberate, calculated hand? That was the question I faced when I stepped outside and saw my lake, my private lake, turned into a bubbling, toxic nightmare. I knew something was off the second I woke up. The silence was wrong. Not the peaceful, early morning kind of quiet, but an unnatural, suffocating stillness that made my skin prickle. Normally, I'd wake to the sound of birds skimming the water, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface, the rustling of wind through the reeds. But that morning? Nothing. Not a single sound. My stomach twisted as I stepped onto my back porch and looked toward the lake. My lake, the one thing in this neighborhood Karen Middleton and her HOA couldn't touch, was supposed to be a shimmering stretch of crystal clear water, reflecting the sky like a sheet of glass. But instead of blue, I saw green. Not the murky green of algae. Not the deep, dark green of a shadowed pond. This was fluorescent, radioactive-looking, bubbling green, like something out of a horror movie. I took a sharp breath, and instantly, my eyes burned. A chemical stench hung thick in the air, coating the back of my throat with something bitter and acrid. I coughed, stepping forward, heart pounding. The grass along the shore had started to wither, the edges curling inward as if scorched. The water fizzled where it met the land. And then I saw them. The fish. Dozens of them, floating belly up, lifeless and bloated. Dead. Something heavy dropped in my stomach. Someone had poisoned my lake. There was no way this was natural. This wasn't some freak algae bloom or runoff from a neighbor's garden. This was intentional. Deliberate. And as my shock turned to rage, my mind settled on the only person in this neighborhood ruthless enough to do something like this. Karen. I stormed back into my house, barely aware of my own movements. My hands were already reaching for my laptop before I had fully processed my next steps. I needed proof. It wasn't enough to know Karen was responsible, I had to catch her red-handed. Pulling up my security camera feed, I fast-forwarded through the footage from the night before, my fingers tightening with every passing hour of nothingness. But then, at 2:47 a.m., I saw it. Karen Middleton. Even through the grainy night vision, there was no mistaking that stiff platinum bob or the pastel pink cardigan she insisted on wearing like a badge of honor. She appeared in the corner of the frame, hauling something from the back of her SUV. The weight of whatever she was carrying nearly made her trip over her own feet, but she pushed forward with grim determination, lugging the first of several massive jugs toward the water. My breath caught as I watched her work. She knew exactly what she was doing. There was no hesitation as she unscrewed each lid and dumped the contents straight into the lake. She moved quickly, glancing around like some cartoon villain, pausing only once to wipe her hands on her khakis before stepping back and admiring her destruction with a satisfied smile. A mixture of rage and disbelief settled in my chest. Who does this? Who wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks, you know what? Let me commit a federal crime just because I don't like a body of water. I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't misinterpreting anything. There she was, in full, high-definition clarity, poisoning my lake. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my pulse thundering in my ears. My first instinct was to march across the street and confront her, to drag her out onto her perfectly manicured lawn and make her explain herself. But Karen was a master manipulator, and she'd deny everything, twisting the situation until she somehow came out as the victim. No, I needed something bigger. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. Before I could fully form a plan, my phone buzzed. A neighborhood text thread. I barely glanced at it, until I saw Karen's name. Apparently, she was already covering her tracks. My jaw tightened as I read the messages. Karen was spreading a rumor that Mr. Henderson, an older man who kept to himself, had poisoned the lake. She claimed she'd seen him handling chemicals in his garage and that he'd been complaining for years that the lake was bad for property values. It was a blatant lie. I gritted my teeth. Karen wasn't just destroying my property, she was trying to pin it on someone else. I clenched my fists and turned back to my laptop. No way in hell was I letting her get away with this. My hands moved before my brain fully caught up. I backed up the footage in 3 different places, one on a flash drive, one on my cloud storage, and one in an email to my lawyer. If Karen tried to pull any legal nonsense, I'd be ready. But that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure she paid for what she'd done. That's when it hit me. The Environmental Protection Agency. Karen hadn't just poisoned my lake, she had committed an environmental crime. And if there was one organization that took illegal dumping seriously, it was the EPA. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across my face as I grabbed my phone and searched for their emergency hotline. Within seconds, I had the number dialed. The line rang once before a clipped, professional voice answered. EPA Enforcement Division, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath. Yeah, hi. I think my neighbor just committed a major environmental violation. There was a slight pause. Can you clarify, sir? I stared at my screen, at the still image of Karen, mid-pour, dumping chemicals into the lake. Oh, I can do better than that. I have video evidence. And let's just say, it's bad. The EPA didn't waste time. By mid-morning, the unmistakable hum of government SUVs rolling up my driveway sent a thrill through my chest. They actually came. Not one, but 2 black vehicles with tinted windows, the kind that exuded quiet authority. As the doors swung open in perfect sync, 3 agents in dark suits stepped out, their expressions unreadable but serious. The lead agent, a tall man with sharp eyes and a clipboard, scanned the property before approaching. I leaned against my porch railing, coffee in hand, like this was just another peaceful morning. Inside, my heart was pounding. Ethan Carter, the agent asked, his voice clipped and efficient. I nodded, setting my mug down. That's me. You must be the guys who take environmental crimes seriously. The agent, Brooks, according to his badge, didn't react to my sarcasm. We received your report. Show us the lake. I led them to the shore, where the air was thicker with the chemical stench than it had been earlier. The water still frothed unnaturally, sickly green, bubbling at the edges like a cauldron of toxic waste. The moment Brooks saw it, his jaw tightened. The second agent, a woman, muttered something under her breath. They got to work fast, pulling out testing kits, vials, and pH strips. One knelt by the shore, scooping a sample into a glass tube, holding it up to the light. His expression darkened. This isn't just herbicide, he said, voice laced with something between concern and disbelief. Some of these chemicals aren't even supposed to be available to the public. That got my attention. I frowned. So what does that mean? Brooks stood, brushing dirt from his knee. It means, he said, fixing me with a look, whoever did this didn't just break local ordinances. They violated federal environmental laws. I couldn't stop the slow, satisfied grin spreading across my face. Karen was so finished. And speaking of Karen, I felt eyes on me. I turned my head slightly, spotting movement behind her perfectly trimmed hedge. Sure enough, there she was. Peeking. Watching. She clutched a coffee mug so tightly her knuckles had gone white, her mouth slightly open, eyes darting between me and the agents like a trapped animal. We locked eyes. I lifted my own mug in a silent toast. Her face drained of color. I saw the exact moment realization hit her. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was out of her control. But if there was one thing I knew about Karen Middleton, it was that she didn't back down gracefully. Instead of doing the smart thing and staying inside, she stormed out of her house, cardigan flapping behind her like a cape of delusion. "What's going on here?" she demanded, striding across the street. Her voice had that forced, too loud edge of someone trying to sound casual but was about 3 seconds from a meltdown. "Why are there government agents on private property?" Brooks barely glanced at her. "EPA business, ma'am. This is an active environmental crime scene." Karen let out a little laugh, the kind people make when they're on the verge of a breakdown but are trying desperately to fake composure. "Oh, come on," she scoffed, eyes flicking between me and the agents. "This is ridiculous. It's just a little weed killer. I was only trying to help." "Oh," she did not just say that. The agents turned to her in unison, their professional poker faces cracking just enough to show their disbelief. Brooks flipped open his clipboard. "Ma'am, are you admitting to dumping chemicals into this lake?" Karen's face froze. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I could practically see her brain buffering. Well, I mean, it's not like it was harmful," she stammered. "The lake was an eyesore. Everyone in the neighborhood wanted it gone. I was doing a community service." Brooks exchanged a look with his partner, then pulled out a notepad. "Ma'am, are you aware that you have committed multiple violations of the Clean Water Act? That contaminating a natural water source, even a private one, is a federal offense? That the substances detected in this water are classified as hazardous under environmental protection laws?" Karen's fake confidence shattered like glass. "Now hold on just a minute," she blurted. I decided to help her out." "Oh, don't worry, Karen," I said, unable to hide the satisfaction in my voice. "I've got the security footage of you doing your little midnight science experiment." Her head snapped toward me. "You, what?" I nodded. "Oh yeah. Full HD, sent copies to my lawyer too. Just in case you felt like denying it." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned back to Brooks, desperate now. "This is absurd. He's lying. He's always been against the HOA." Brooks sighed and pulled out a tablet, tapping the screen a few times. I had already sent them the footage earlier that morning. Now, Karen got to watch herself on screen, pouring gallons of illegal chemicals into the lake. With all the subtlety of a cartoon villain. The color drained from her face entirely. This is taken out of context," she croaked. Brooks snapped his clipboard shut. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning." And that was when the real panic set in. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice climbing octaves. "I have rights. I am the president of the Homeowners Association." Brooks didn't even blink. "Actually, ma'am, you have the right to legal representation. But based on what we're seeing here, you're looking at some serious fines. Potential criminal charges. And if the contamination is severe enough..." He tucked his clipboard under his arm. "Mandatory environmental rehabilitation." Karen started hyperventilating. "You can't arrest me for this. It's just water." "He's being dramatic." She jabbed a shaking finger in my direction. I just shrugged. "Hey Karen. Remember all those times you fined people for not keeping their grass short enough? Consider this karma." The agents escorted her toward the SUVs. For the first time in her life, Karen didn't have the upper hand. She had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood, acting like a dictator. But today? Today, she was just another citizen facing the consequences of her actions. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the time Karen's SUV disappeared down the street with the EPA agents, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with whispers, text messages, and not-so-subtle glances over fences. The mighty Karen Middleton, the iron-fisted queen of the HOA, had just been hauled off for questioning by the federal government. People who had once cowered under her ridiculous rules, who had been forced to repaint their homes for the crime of picking the wrong shade of beige, who had been fined for leaving their trash cans out for an extra hour, were now peeking out from behind their blinds, their faces alight with something dangerously close to joy. And just when things couldn't get worse for her, someone, probably Greg Dawson, the ever-nervous HOA vice president, called an emergency HOA meeting. Normally, these gatherings were dull, sparsely attended affairs where Karen dictated new rules while everyone else either nodded along in silent suffering or prayed for a quick death. But not tonight. Tonight, the community center was packed. People who hadn't bothered showing up in years crammed into chairs, leaned against walls, even stood outside by the windows. A ripple of excitement ran through the room, an almost electric energy fueled by years of pent-up resentment. At the front of the room, Greg looked like he might pass out. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses with shaking hands as he faced a crowd that was far more engaged than usual. We need to discuss the situation regarding Miss Middleton, he stammered. Given the recent events, it seems prudent to take a vote on. Throw her out, someone yelled from the back. A roar of agreement erupted through the crowd. Greg flinched, but the motion had already been made. For years, Karen had ruled with absolute authority, silencing dissent, punishing even the smallest infractions. But now there was no one left to defend her. No one who owed her favors. No one willing to stick their neck out for the HOA tyrant who had just been exposed as a criminal. A motion was made. A vote was held. And within 10 minutes, Karen Middleton was officially removed as HOA president. The moment Greg banged the gavel, the room erupted into cheers. From my seat in the back, arms crossed, I sipped my water like I was watching the season finale of the best reality show in years. But the best part? The absolute best part? This was just the beginning. Because 2 days later, the EPA released their official statement. The contamination in my lake? Confirmed hazardous waste. The cleanup process? Would take weeks. The fines? Astronomical. And the best part? Karen was personally liable. I read the report twice, letting the words sink in. The HOA wasn't responsible for her actions. She couldn't hide behind them anymore. Every single dollar of the cleanup, every penalty, every legal fee, it all fell on her. I made sure to be outside when she returned home. Her SUV pulled into the driveway, and for the first time since I'd known her, Karen didn't look smug. She stepped out, moving slowly, her normally perfect posture sagging with exhaustion. She looked 10 years older than she had just days before. Her usual air of superiority was gone, replaced with something I never thought I'd see on her face. Defeat. She saw me sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, and hesitated. For a split second, I thought she might actually say something. Maybe even an apology. But no. Karen Middleton didn't apologize. Instead, she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and marched toward her front door like she still had an ounce of dignity left to her name. "Welcome back," I called, raising my mug in mock greeting. She shot me a glare, but there was no fire behind it. Just exhaustion. She disappeared inside, slamming the door behind her. For the rest of the week, she was a ghost. Normally, Karen strutted through the neighborhood like a queen, overseeing her domain. But now she was invisible. No surprise HOA inspections. No passive-aggressive emails about someone's mailbox being an inch too tall. People stared when she walked outside. Some whispered. Some laughed. Her downfall had become the neighborhood's favorite topic of conversation. But the real moment, the one that truly cemented her fate, came when the EPA cleanup team arrived. I was in my backyard when the trucks pulled up. Workers stepped out, unloading hazardous waste disposal materials, protective suits, and high-tech filtration equipment. Karen must have seen them too, because she stormed across her yard, her expression twisted in frustration. I almost choked on my drink when I saw what happened next. The lead EPA agent didn't just ignore her complaints. He handed her a clipboard. And then, with an almost cruel kind of professionalism, he pointed at a section of the contaminated shoreline. As part of your settlement agreement, you'll be assisting in the remediation process. Karen blinked. I'll be what? You'll be assisting in the cleanup. The agent's expression didn't change. Failure to comply could lead to additional legal action. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. Karen, the woman who had spent years fining people for minor infractions, the woman who had once told an elderly couple they had too many flower pots on their porch, was now legally required to clean up the toxic mess she had created. And she couldn't refuse. I watched as she stood there, stunned into silence for the first time in her life. Then, without another word, she took the gloves and protective suit they handed her and got to work. For the first time, Karen Middleton was on the receiving end of the very rules she had spent years weaponizing against others. And I had a feeling this was only going to get better. Karen Middleton, the once untouchable dictator of the HOA, was now knee-deep in the very toxic lake she had poisoned. Clad in a government-issued hazmat suit, she scooped dead fish and contaminated debris from the water under the watchful eyes of EPA officials. Her movements were stiff, reluctant, but she had no choice. This was court-mandated. The same woman who had fined neighbors for leaving their holiday decorations up too long was now scraping sludge off the very property she had tried to destroy. Poetic justice at its finest. I made sure to capture the moment. A few pictures. A short video. Nothing too invasive, just enough to commemorate history in the making. And because I couldn't resist, I uploaded a short clip online with the title, HOA Karen Finally Cleans Up Her Act. It went viral within hours. The internet was ruthless. Memes flooded in, people calling her the lake killer, toxic Karen, and the HOA tyrant who got what she deserved. Commenters from all over shared their own HOA horror stories, cheering for the downfall of one of their own kind. Karen, of course, tried to play the victim. She claimed the entire thing had been blown out of proportion, that she was unfairly targeted. But no one bought it. The EPA doesn't arrest people over misunderstandings. The fines, the legal fees, the humiliation, it all proved too much. One morning, without warning, a for sale sign appeared in her front yard. No farewell emails. No goodbye speeches. Just a moving truck that showed up one day, and then, she was gone. The neighborhood didn't just breathe a sigh of relief. They celebrated. Some people actually threw a block party, toasting to the end of Karen's reign. The HOA, now free from her iron grip, rolled back dozens of ridiculous rules. People started living normally again, without the constant fear of fines for minor infractions. And me? I stood by my now clear lake, watching the last of Karen's things get packed away. There was no final confrontation. No last words exchanged. Just the simple, undeniable fact that she had lost. Justice had never felt so good. But what about you? Have you ever had a power-hungry HOA or a neighbor like Karen? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.